What is up, middle school? Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic day so far. I know I've had a pretty good day. Aubrey and I decided to go do a little bit of shopping, and she went inside, and I said, you know what, I'm going to stay in here and I'm going to do my sermon just to change it up a little bit. It's nice outside. Got some of the windows down. Ringo's here in the back. I don't know if you can see him. But it's a good day. I just wanted to give you a couple of announcements before we jump into our sermon. So the first thing is, guys, sadly, this is actually our last embassy of the spring semester, and I know it's kind of a bummer. But we're planning on doing things this summer. I can't really tell you what those things are because with just all the changes happening right now, we don't really know very much specifics, but make sure you're following us on our social medias at Embassy MS. Just make sure you're keeping up to date with that, and that your parents are keeping up to date with the emails. And I'll see you in about 3 seconds after this bumper. So middle school, here we are in the last week of our series on a guy in the Bible named Joseph, and it's called Big Picture. And why is it called that? Well, Joseph had a lot of wild and weird and unbelievable things happen to him, good and bad. But all along, God was working toward the bigger picture in his life. The bigger picture Joseph couldn't see. Now, before we get to the last part of Joseph's story today, let me ask you a question. Have you ever tried to get a little bit of payback on someone? Maybe a younger sibling stole your favorite sweater without asking, or a friend spread a rumor about you, or the guy in your small group just always pranks you for some reason. I know I have. I remember this one time when I was, I think, a 6th grader. I was at Greenways Middle School, and or I actually think it was called intermediate school back then, but we were playing the game Knockout, and when we were playing, I was next up, so I had been passed the ball, and one of my good friends, as soon as I got past the ball, he came up behind me and pants me right in front of everyone. It was at recess, everyone was there, everyone saw my underwear. It was super embarrassing, and I definitely wanted to give him a little bit of payback. I never actually did, but the feeling was there. Now, your story might not be as embarrassing or anything like mine, but I bet you can relate. And how do I know that? And it's because in a big and small ways, we've all been wronged. We've all been hurt. We've all been frustrated. We've all had had someone do something to us, or say something about us, or treat us in a way that makes us want one thing and one thing only: payback. We want the other person to experience the same amount of pain or frustration or embarrassment that we experience because of them. Here's the thing. We all have the power to pay back. We not only have the potential to want to pay back, we have the power to actually do it. See, I think there's a couple of ways that we can show payback, and sometimes that payback is public. We do something directly and openly to this person who wronged us, and maybe that's by confronting them in the hallway with a big fight, or tagging them in a nasty post on social media, or doing something to embarrass them in front of someone else. See, that's the kind of payback that isn't hard to recognize. It's out there for the world to see, and that's the way we want it to be. See, sometimes I think also that the payback is more passive, meaning it's a little less obvious and a little bit more behind the other person's back. Maybe that's even spreading a rumor about them, or moving seat at the lunch table, or just rolling your eyes at them when they walk towards your way. Though the other person may not recognize it or feel the consequence of it right away, you're still getting the payback you're looking for in a more subtle way. Or maybe for you, the payback is just in your head, kind of like it was for me in 6th grade. You haven't taken a step to actually do the payback, either publicly or passively, but you think about it all the time. You're constantly setting up scenarios in your mind how you'd get the payback you want. And even then, though you may not actually take the steps to make it happen, it still consumes you. Now listen, I know this all sounds harsh, but we're all friends here, right? So can we just be honest with each other for a second and admit to each other that we've all felt this way a time or two? There's just something about payback that feels fair to us. Some lady on her bicycle. But just because payback feels fair, it doesn't mean it is fair. It doesn't mean it's what's best for us. In fact, there's a better approach we could all take if we put down our power to payback. Now, if there's anyone in the Bible who had a reason for wanting payback, it was our guy Joseph. His story is full of people betraying him, lying about him, and causing him years and years of pain and suffering that he didn't really deserve. So let's do a quick recap from these past couple of weeks that we've been going through Joseph's story. So Joseph was one of a dozen sons, but his father, Jacob, loved him the most. Talk about some awkward family dynamics, right? But because of that, his brothers got so mad that they threw him in a well and eventually sold him into slavery, where he ended up in Egypt. Then, when he was actually doing a good enough job where he was working to get a promotion in the house of this guy named Potiphar, Potiphar's wife made a move on Joseph. Joseph turned her down, rightfully, so she made up a lie that got him thrown in prison. And there he stayed for several years before finally getting released and promoted to work for the Pharaoh. It's kind of a crazy story, right? And I know it's a lot, but try and put yourself in Joseph's sandals for a minute. I can tell you what I'd be thinking about during all those years of slavery and separation from my family and imprisonment. I'd probably be thinking of nothing else other than payback. And especially to all the people who wronged me. And I would do it as soon as I got the chance, wouldn't you? Especially if you were in Joseph's shoes. So let's pick up Joseph's story right back where we left it and find out exactly what he did. At this point, Joseph was doing much better, actually. He had not only been released from prison, he had been elevated to second in command over all of Egypt. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the distribution of food throughout the entire Egyptian empire. And that was a big deal because during this period there was an intense famine in the land. The famine, or shortage of food, was so bad that people from far away started making the journey to Egypt to find food so they wouldn't starve. And Joseph was the guy they were coming to for help. Now, out of all the people in the world, guess who showed up one day to ask Joseph for food? And I'm smiling and laughing because none other than the people who wronged him the most, his brothers, came to ask for food, the very same guys who sold him into slavery only years ago. What are the chances? While Joseph immediately recognized his brothers when they came to him, his brothers didn't realize who they were speaking with. It had been so long since they had seen him that they may have even assumed probably that he was dead. And if they didn't, they certainly didn't imagine the brother they turned into a slave would have so much power in Egypt. And yet, there stood Joseph in a position of complete power before his brothers. They all needed his help. They all needed him to save their lives. And in that moment, he had the power to pay back all the wrongs they had committed against him. This was the moment that Joseph could have been dreaming of. The moment when payback would finally be his. But take a look at what happened next. Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said this to his attendants: "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of him. "Please, come closer," he said to them. So they came closer. And he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me into this place. It was God who sent me here, ahead of you to preserve your lives. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all your children and all your grandchildren, your flocks and herds and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, your household and all of your animals will starve." And this is Genesis 45, 1 through 5, and then 10 through 11. What? I mean, Joseph literally could have done anything he wanted to his brothers. He could have had them paid back 1,000,000 times over for what they had done to him. He could have left them to starve or snapped his fingers and had them thrown in prison or even killed. That's how much power he had to pay them back. But instead, Joseph took a different path. He chose forgiveness. I mean, how amazing is that? Can you imagine how surprised Joseph's brothers must have been? One minute they found out that their brother Joseph was alive, and in the next, he was embracing them rather than giving them what they deserved. So friends, here's what I think we can learn from this part of Joseph's story. When you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. Joseph's response to his brothers gives us a powerful example of how God wants us to deal with people who wrong us. We may never know why they did what they did, and they may never apologize for the hurt or the embarrassment that they caused us. There are details of the bigger picture that we'll never see or understand, but we still have a choice: forgiveness over payback. We have the power to choose. Think of it this way. If you're in a relationship with another person, whether that be a parent, a friend, a sibling, a boyfriend or a girlfriend, don't think you should have one if you're in middle school, but whatever, anyone, there's something that connects the two of you. There's a bridge. But when someone wrongs or hurts you, that bridge is suddenly broken. It becomes shaky and the connection between the two of you is damaged. Then you're left with a choice. You can either burn the bridge, breaking it down completely by paying back wrong for wrong or hurt for hurt. Or you can build the bridge, reestablishing your connection with things like forgiveness, grace, and peace. Of course, I'm not saying you should just keep rebuilding bridges with people who have hurt you deeply and repeatedly. Sometimes the best way to actually choose forgiveness is to set some healthy boundaries or talk about the wrongs that they have done to you with someone who can help. Just a hint, maybe some of those people are like your small group or your parents, and those are just some great places to start. But when it's possible, it's our job to lay down our right to pay back and instead choose forgiveness. Joseph could have made the choice to prove a point. He could have fought to be right. He could have chosen not to help his brothers and burn the bridge between them. But instead, he chose to forgive them, and that changed everything. So friends, when you can't see the bigger picture, choose to forgive. Now, I'm sure some of you are hearing this and thinking, you know what? Yeah, that sounds nice, but how can someone actually do that? How can you choose forgiveness instead of payback? That's really a fair question because honestly, this is really hard stuff. It's hard to choose between building a bridge rather than being a bridge burner. And sometimes we can make it even harder is when we can't see the bigger picture, when we don't know all the details or the full story about the situation we're in. So how do we start? First one is start small. Practice extending things like grace, forgiveness, and peace to others in small ways. When a friend teases you and hurts your feelings, when your sibling eats the last piece of cake that you've been saving, or when your parents snap at you for something that wasn't your fault, practice choosing forgiveness rather than responding with payback. The more you do this in small, everyday things, the easier it will be to do it when the bigger things come your way. The second thing I think you can do is forgive first. Think about your own life for a second. Who's wronged you recently? You don't need to wait for them to apologize to forgive. You don't need to wait for them to make the first move and say sorry for what they've done. You see, the beauty of forgiveness is that you can do it on your own right now. You can make a move to forgive first so that you can move on. Lastly, I think the third thing that you can do is pursue forgiveness. We can't always control the way that people treat us, but we control the way we treat them in response. We can pursue forgiveness. What would it look like for you to forgive someone who has wronged or hurt you this week? Maybe it's an outward step, like starting a conversation, or start inviting them to sit with you again, or unblocking them on social media. Or maybe it's an inward step, a prayer you pray in your heart, or a choice you make to not say rude things, or a conversation with your small group leader to help you out. Whatever it is, friends, I want you to take one step this week to pursue forgiveness rather than payback in your relationships. Now, of course, forgiveness is not always easy, but the good news is we have a God who is the best at forgiving. He's forgiven each and every one of us, and he wants to help us do the same for others. And when we ask for his help forgiving someone, he will always give it. So today, that's where you might need to start. And maybe what you need to do is ask God to help you forgive someone who has wronged you so you can start building a bridge toward forgiveness rather than payback. And remember, even when you can't see the bigger picture, choose forgive. Choose to forgive. Maybe I should remember it. So, Joseph's story is pretty crazy, right? I mean, he was part of a family in conflict who was tossed into a well and sold into slavery by his own brothers. He fought off repeated invitations to have an affair with his boss's wife, and he was thrown into prison for something he didn't even do. So even though he went through all of those crazy experiences in his life, Joseph eventually gained enough power to help and even forgive the family who got him into this mess in the first place. In the middle of all this stuff, Joseph couldn't see the bigger picture that we see today, the way God was working in his life. He just had to keep trusting and keep believing and making the next right choice to do what he thought was best. And eventually, years later, it all made sense. Things were made right. He finally saw the bigger picture. And I think the same can be true in our lives. So as we close our conversation today, as I end this last embassy message for the spring, what I want you to do is think about how Joseph forgave his brothers. And I want you to think about this last question. What is the hardest thing about choosing forgiveness? Friends, I hope you have enjoyed this series. I know it's been so good for Shane and I just to preach this to you. It's been so good for me personally. I know that none of us were expecting really any of this to happen. You know, COVID has just been so life-changing in so many different ways. And I hope that these small 15-minute messages have helped you out a little bit. But I think the thing that is most important is the small group questions that are afterwards. They're always, hopefully you've seen them, they've been in the YouTube description, but just going through those, whether it be by yourself or with your parents, or even if you want to talk to those about with us, with Shane and I, you can always do that. Just know that we are always here for you. And even though we might not see each other for a little bit, we're going to eventually. Things are going to be okay. We're all going to be all right. And one thing that I think you guys should do this summer is just look up some resources on your own of just some great things. There's things like the Bible Project, or the church even has this subscription that you can get for free called Right Now Media. And it's basically like the Netflix of Bible studies. There's just thousands of Bible studies that you can go through. Where there's this awesome app called YouVersion, which is the Bible app, and it has reading plans that you can go through, and you can literally get a reminder to read your Bible. So you can't have that excuse of, you know what, I forgot to read my Bible, because you can't say that because your phone's gonna remind you. But what I'm trying to say is, I know that things have been crazy. But I hope that you are still putting time and effort into your faith, because God wants a relationship with you. But you got to put some effort to have a relationship with Him. Guys, I love you so much. I will see you soon. Things will be okay. Trust God. Keep calm. Wash your hands. In the name of Jim Shelburne.